drawn and redrawn, the making of India's internal boundaries. Hi, and welcome back to India State Stories. World War II marked a turning point. As Britain's global position weakened, political claims from both the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League grew bolder. We examine how the princes reacted to shifting British policies and how the cabinet mission plan attempted but failed to accommodate them. More details are in the show notes below, and let's dive into the conversation.
You know, when you read about big historical moments, do you ever stop and think, what's really going on behind the scenes, beyond the main headlines? Because today, we're diving into exactly that kind of story. It's about the Indian princely states during World War II, a really pivotal time leading up to India's independence. But that's a side of the story you might not know much about. Yeah, the usual story is, the British versus Indian nationalism, Congress, the Muslim League. But there's this third major element. Over 500 princely states. So our mission today is to unpack how things played out between them, the British, Congress, and the League, basically from 1939 up to 46. And you're going to see how their own fight, really, for survival and autonomy wasn't just some footnote. It was a strategic game that honestly almost changed the map of modern India. You'll definitely get a richer picture of how India was formed.
Oh, absolutely. And it's quite something when you grasp the sheer number of these states and how diverse they were. You had huge ones like Hyderabad, bigger than many countries in Europe, and then tiny little states, just a few square miles, and their relationships with the British. All over the place. But the key thing, the insight here, is that for these princes, independence wasn't really about one single India. It was about their survival, their power, trying to keep their centuries-old rule going while this new nation was taking shape all around them. So yeah, their role, critical, but also really complex, driven by self-preservation mostly.
Okay, so with that complex picture in mind, let's start in 1939. War breaks out in Europe.
Yeah.
What's the immediate impact in India? How did the British try to handle it, with the demands for self-rule already simmering? Lord Linlithgow, the viceroy, he made an initial offer, right?
He did. He basically reiterated that dominion status was the goal, which, meant self-government within the empire.
Not full independence.
Exactly, which was already a sticking point for many leaders. He also suggested talks after the war, maybe tweaking the 1935 Act, and a consultative group for the war effort. Seemed like a step, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, it just wasn't enough. Not for Congress, not for the Muslim League. They both rejected it straight away. And Congress actually made a big statement by having its ministries resign in, I think, 7 provinces.
Wow, okay. But what about the princes? The Chamber of Princes.
They had a very different take. They pledged support for the war effort, sure, but their number one priority, preserving their autonomy, protecting their rights in whatever came next. They were crystal clear. No commitment affecting their rights or interests should be made without their consent. And that stance, that demand, it's absolutely vital. It really sets up their whole strategy for the next few years.
Right. So the rules of the game were sort of set. But then January 1940, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, he doesn't just make a move. He flips the whole board over. This two-nation theory comes out. Hindus and Muslims form 2 separate nations. And then, just a few months later, the Lahore Resolution calls explicitly for Pakistan, a separate state.
It was a political earthquake, absolutely. It shattered that idea of a single, unified, independent India. Everyone, including the princes, had to rethink everything.
So how did the British respond to that?
Well, they tried again with the August offer in 1940. Linlithgow offered more Indian seats on the Executive Council, a war advisory council.
But there was a catch, wasn't there?
A huge one. Britain essentially said it wouldn't transfer their present responsibilities to any system of government whose authority is directly denied by large and powerful elements.
So basically, we won't impose a solution if a major group like the Muslim League presumably rejects it.
Precisely. Which predictably meant this offer was also rejected by both Congress and the League.
It's a pattern, isn't it? British offers just not quite hitting the mark.
Too little, too late, consistently failing to meet these escalating demands for real power. Although, it is worth noting, even with the rejections, Indian representation on the Executive Council did go up later from 3 to 8 in July 41. So, a small shift, but not enough to change minds.
Okay, so things are tense. Then Japan enters the war in late 41. Suddenly the war isn't far away anymore.
Not at all. Japan's advances were stunningly fast. Singapore falls in February 42, Rangoon in March. The war is literally on India's doorstep.
That must have raised the stakes enormously for everyone.
Dramatically. And it forced Britain's hand again. They needed India's full cooperation for the war effort. now more than ever.
Which brings us to the Cripps mission, March 1942. Churchill announces Sir Stafford Cripps is going to India to rally all the forces of Indian life. What was the deal here?
Cripps came with a pretty detailed plan. The big picture was a post-war body to create an Indian Union. This union would have dominion status, crucially, with the power to secede later from the Commonwealth.
Secede. So full independence was on the table eventually.
Potentially, yes. And here's another key part. Provinces that didn't want to join this new union could actually draft their own constitutions.
Wow. Okay. So that sounds like an implicit acceptance of partition, potentially.
It certainly opened that door very clearly. And for the princely states, the plan offered them proportional representation in this constitution-making body. And negotiations to revise their treaties, whether they join the union or not, their future was definitely up for grabs.
And what about this concept of paramountcy? That seems central. It was the basis of British control over the states, right?
Absolutely central. Paramountcy was the crown's supreme authority. Foreign affairs, defense, sometimes even who inherited the throne. The states weren't fully sovereign because of it.
So what did Cripps say about that?
He made it clear. The British government would not transfer paramountcy to any future Indian government.
Okay, so what happens to it?
It would simply end for any state that joined the Indian Union. But, and this is huge, it would continue for any state that chose not to join.
So if you stay out, you're still technically under British oversight. But if you join India, you're fully in, and paramountcy vanishes.
Exactly. Which immediately made the rulers ask, well, hang on, if we don't join, can we form our own union, a separate block of states?
A third India, maybe?
Potentially. Cripps apparently said that personally he didn't see a fundamental difficulty, but he couldn't give a definite yes, just a hint.
Interesting. So a bit of ambiguity there. Did he give him any other advice?
Yeah, he told the rulers they should start talking to Congress and the League. And he suggested the smaller states should think about grouping together, maybe forming federations. A subtle warning, perhaps, that being small and isolated might not be viable.
So this whole Cripps package, how did it land?
It landed with a thud, universally rejected. Congress rejected it. The Muslim League rejected it.
And the princes, what was their reaction?
This is fascinating. According to the sources, the rulers, after watching the parties reject it, heaved an almost audible sigh of relief.
A sigh of relief. Why? What were they relieved about? You'd think maybe they'd want a plan.
It tells you how much they feared being railroaded into something they hadn't agreed to. That relief wasn't just dodging a bullet. It was, I think, relief that they still had room to maneuver to preserve their autonomy. They clearly felt the Cripps plan, especially with that provincial opt-out clause, maybe pushed them too close to a future they didn't control. One prime minister even said, "Personally, I feel that we escaped one very narrowly."
So they bought themselves some time, essentially. But the underlying problems didn't go away, especially for the smaller states.
Not at all. After Cripps failed, those concerns just grew louder. The British did try to reassure the rulers in early 43. They said fulfilling obligations from treaties and SANADs, those official grants, remained policy.
What kind of obligations are we talking about?
Things like protecting them from external attack, helping maintain internal order, protecting their dynasties, even certain economic rights. The basics of the relationship.
Okay, so promises of protection. But what about that idea Cripps floated about non-joining states forming their own union? Did that go anywhere?
It died pretty quickly. Despite Cripps's personal comment, Lord Linlithgow later dismissed it as just not practical politics. Basically a non-starter.
Why not practical? Too complicated. Too many small states.
All of the above. Many small states simply didn't have the money or the trained staff to run things properly under a new system. They were also really vulnerable to political unrest spilling over from British India. Britain just didn't want the chaos, the headache of hundreds of tiny, potentially unstable entities.
So what were the proposed solutions then? If they couldn't form their own union and staying separate was tricky.
A few ideas were floated. Maybe the viceroy takes over administration directly in some small states, possibly merging them with British India later, or more likely, administrative absorption into larger neighboring princely states, or just combining groups of small states together.
And did that actually happen?
Yes, there was a concrete example. The attachment scheme in 1943. A number of smaller semi-jurisdictional states in Kathiawar and Gujarat were basically attached to larger neighbors for administrative purposes. It covered a pretty big area and population.
A clear signal then. The writing was on the wall for the very small states. They needed to adapt or be absorbed.
Definitely. It pushed the princes, especially the more powerful ones, to think even more strategically.
Right. And as the war starts turning in favor of the Allies, the focus inevitably shifts back to India's future constitution.
Yeah.
And this is where one figure really steps up for the princes, the Nawab of Bhopal.
Exactly. He becomes Chancellor of the Chamber of Princes and really energizes it. The goal, to forge the rulers into what he called a third force in Indian politics.
A third force, meaning?
Meaning a unified bloc of princely states that could hold the balance of power between a potentially divided Congress and Muslim League. His vision was for a future India with a very weak central government, with most powers, the residuary powers, staying with the states.
So maximum autonomy, basically. And could they act as kingmakers?
That was the idea.
Yeah.
And he made a very bold move to assert this. In November 1944, he pushed through a resolution in the chamber.
What did it say?
It stated very clearly that the Crown's relationship with the states cannot and should not be transferred to any third party without the consent of the states concerned.
A direct challenge. Don't just hand us over to an independent India. Our relationship is with you, the Crown.
Precisely. It was a clear declaration of their intent to negotiate their own future, not just be absorbed.
How did the British react to that?
Well, initially, the Viceroy, Lord Wavell, actually disallowed the resolution, which caused a bit of a crisis. The Chambers Committee resigned in protest.
Pushback.
Yes, but Wavell seemed anxious to keep the rulers on side, especially as things moved towards independence. So in June 1945, he gave them a crucial assurance.
It was.
He basically confirmed their position. He stated that there would be no future transference of relationship of the states with the Crown to any other authority without their consent.
That sounds like a major win for the Nawab and the princes. It validated their third force idea, didn't it? Gave them real leverage.
It absolutely did. It was a significant victory. It confirmed they had a distinct position and had to be consulted directly. Then, later that year, September 45, Wavell announced his next plan. A constitution-making body would be convened, and crucially, there would be discussions with representatives of the states on how they would participate.
Okay, discussions. But that immediately brings up a big question. Who represents the states? The rulers themselves? Or the people living in the states?
Exactly the issue. Congress pushed hard for popular representatives, elected by the people. They wanted democratic representation.
But the rulers?
Many rulers argued they held the power, the sovereignty, and therefore they should be the ones negotiating and representing their states. A real clash of old versus new ideas about legitimacy and power.
Okay, so the stage is set for some serious negotiation. Which brings us to 1946 and the Cabinet Mission. This seems like the moment where things really come to a head, especially with this idea of paramountcy lapsing.
It really is. The Cabinet Mission came with the most definitive proposals yet. And the idea that paramountcy wouldn't be transferred, but would simply lapse when Britain left, that changed everything for the states. It meant they'd technically become fully independent entities overnight.
The huge shift. What were the British hoping for at this point?
Prime Minister Attlee said in March 46 he hoped the statesmen of British India and of princely India could work things out together. A bit optimistic, perhaps?
Given the range of views from the states themselves, right? What were they telling the mission?
Oh, it was a real mix. You had the Nawab of Bhopal still pushing for maximum sovereignty, a very loose federation, pleading don't transfer paramountcy. He even suggested if India split into two, maybe there should be a third India of states.
Still holding on to that idea.
Very much so. Then many other states generally wanted paramountcy to lapse, definitely no forced joining of India or Pakistan, the right maybe to form their own confederation, and basically to be left alone internally.
What about the smaller states? Had their views changed?
Some, like Durgapur and Travancore, were now openly advocating for grouping together into larger units, recognizing reality, perhaps.
And the big states, like Hyderabad.
Hyderabad was really emphasizing its claim to full independence. They even talked about getting back territories they had ceded to the East India Company way back when, and demanded a free outlet to the sea, maybe through Goa. Very ambitious.
So a whole spectrum of demands. Anyone pushing for unity.
Well, you had figures like Sir Mirza Ismail from Jaipur. His priority was different. He focused on trying to get Congress and the League to agree first, and also on preserving the ruling dynasties themselves, arguing they represented traditional Indian culture. So, yeah, a real messy picture.
Amidst all this conflicting advice and demands, there was one key piece of advice given to the rulers, wasn't there? From the political advisor, Sir Conrad Corfield.
Yes, absolutely pivotal. In June 1946, Corfield told the rulers straight. The lapse of paramountcy gives you the best bargaining position possible.
Basically saying, your link to Britain is ending, you'll be legally independent, use that leverage now.
Exactly. He told them, this is your moment. And his advice was very practical, too.
Also,
He urged them, form a negotiating committee immediately, give it a clear mandate, figure out how state representatives will be chosen for talks, make sure dynastic issues are off the table in negotiations with British India, and insist that any final deal has to be ratified by each individual state.
so coordinate, get organized, protect your core interests, and maintain individual state consent.
Yes. And he promised the political department's help during the transition and strongly advised rulers to stay in close touch with their own people, presumably to bolster their legitimacy back home during these talks.
So how did the princes respond to Corfield's advice and the cabinet mission plan overall?
They took the advice. The Chamber of Princes passed a resolution on June 10, 1946. They formally accepted the cabinet mission plan as the way forward for Indian independence. Crucially, they welcomed the declaration about paramountcy lapsing. They did note they needed some adjustments for the interim period and clarity on key issues, but importantly, they agreed to set up that negotiating committee.
The one Corfield suggested.
The very one. To engage with the constituent assembly that was being set up for British India. So this was it. They were officially at the negotiating table, armed with the knowledge that paramountcy would lapse, ready to bargain for their future.
So, wrapping this period up, 1939 to 1946, what's the big takeaway for understanding India's independence?
I think the biggest takeaway is that it really wasn't just a two-way street between London and Delhi, or between the British and the nationalist movements. This deep dive shows just how complex it was. You had these hundreds of princely states, this third force, actively playing the game with their own fears, their own ambitions. They weren't just waiting to be told what would happen, they were strategizing, trying desperately to shape their own destiny right up to the end. Often overlooked, but absolutely a key part of the story.
Yeah, it really complicates the narrative in a fascinating way. We've seen how the war put pressure on Britain, how the Indian political demands just grew and grew, and how the princes maneuvered, trying to find space for themselves, eventually using that lapse of paramountcy as their main bargaining chip. It really underscores that history isn't this neat, linear path. It's messy, full of these different struggles, compromises, unexpected turns, and the fate of hundreds of these states was literally hanging in the balance, and it adds so much texture to that moment of transition.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a question, perhaps, for you listening. When we look at the world today, with ongoing debates about self-determination, borders being redrawn, what lessons can we maybe take from how these princely states tried to navigate the end of an empire and the birth of new nations? How does the bargaining position of smaller players, their strategies, their fears, influence those really big historical shifts? Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope it's given you a unique, maybe a more nuanced perspective on this crucial time in Indian history. Until next time, keep exploring.